All right, a wonderful day, guys. So, basically, for today, we are going to be looking at questions, techniques, and methods on how to actually answer from chapter 3, which is momentum and impulse. Okay, so for this chapter, you got to remember a couple of things. Number one, the formulas, because we have quite a number of formulas in this chapter. We have to know about impulse, impulsive force, momentum, and then we have to relate the impulse momentum theorem, and then we have the principle of conservation of momentum, we have principle of conservation of kinetic energy, we have collisions in elastic and inelastic collisions. All right, so what we got to do for today is we have to analyze questions and have a look at situations based on the question given. Okay, number one, usually the questions are given, but diagrams are not given. So what you have to do, you have to draw the diagrams. Number two is the diagrams are given. So what you need to do, you have to extract the information from the diagrams too. Okay, so let's move on to the first question. Okay, in this question, it's quite clear that the diagram is given. But remember, diagrams give data, questions or words like this also give data. Okay, right. Before collision, let's have a look. You have everything moving on the same plane, which is the horizontal plane. After collision, there's an angle. Okay. The moment there's an angle, dulu sebelum ni chapter we learn stuva and so on kan, X component, Y component. Dalam sini, no stuva, tapi there is 4x component and 4y component. You have to do two separate calculations. Tapi guna formula momentum atau kinetic energy atau impulse and so on. Alright, let's have a look at the first question. A tennis ball, mass M1. Maksudnya ini adalah untuk tennis ball. Please pay attention, M1, M2 untuk mana satu? M1 untuk apa? M2 untuk apa? U adalah initial velocity. Adakah itu U1 atau U2? U1 untuk objek lain, U2 untuk objek lain. V, final velocity. V1 untuk objek lain, V2 untuk objek lain. Selalunya U1 adalah referring to object A. V1 also referring to object A, tapi before collision and after collision. Sebab before collision adalah initial velocity, after collision is final velocity. That's simple logic. Okay, now let's move on. A tennis ball of mass M1 moving with initial velocity U1 collides with a soccer ball of mass M2 initially at rest. Maksud dia, M1 ni ada velocity dia, initial dia. Tapi M2 dia ada. Maksud dia, M2 punya initial velocity adalah kosong. The moment there's words like at rest and so on, it's kosong. Okay? Alright, now, let's move on. After the collision, the moment they say after the collision is final velocity and so on. Atau M2, V2. Okay? The tennis ball is deflected 50 degrees from its initial direction. Okay, tennis ball yang bergerak ke arah berlainan. With a velocity V1, V1 refers to tennis ball, shown in figure 3.6. Okay, dalam sini, please remember that the moment you see the word before collision, after collision, the first thing you got to do is determine which type of collision it is. We have learned two types of collisions, elastic and inelastic. Okay, sekarang dua objek bertembung and then it moves away. The moment it moves in a separate direction after collision, that is called elastic collision. Dia macam dulu analogi getah yang we did, right? Elastik getah dekat dinding. Apa jadi? Getah tu pantul ke arah yang lain kan? So that is the concept of elastic collision. So same thing over here. It is deflected towards a certain angle. Dalam sini 50 darjah. Okay. Suppose that M1 is 250 gram. Remember, ini gram kena tukar kepada kilogram. Kenapa? SI unit. Very important. M2 900 grams, which is 0.9 kilo. U1 20 meter per second. Initial velocity. U2, okay, U2 apa? Kosong kan sebab at rest. Next, V1 final velocity untuk objek 1, 4 meter per second. Tapi 4 meter per second is the final velocity. What do we need? We need the x component and y component sebab dia is at an angle. Okay, dapat diagram macam ni, just draw like this. You know which is x component, y component. Sini x, sini y. X ke kanan, positif, label dulu. Y ke bawah, negatif. So that you know, you have to put masa masuk sini apa-apa. Let's say a certain number, cos theta. X cos theta kan, positif. Sini y sin theta. Y tu akan jadi negatif. Okay. Let's move on. Calculate the magnitude and direction. This is another indication that you need to do vectors, which means resolution of vectors. Sebab dia tanya apa? Direction of soccer ball after the collision. Dia minta apa? Untuk soccer ball. Okay. Now, number one, what you got to do? Extract informations. Number one, that is very, very important. M1, tulis cepat-cepat. Because extracting information would not take much time. Just make sure you guys know which one is for which one and that is good enough. 0.250 kilogram. Why? 250 gram tukar kepada kilogram. You get 0.250 kilogram. Okay. Next. Initial velocity for 1, which is 20 meter per second. Initial velocity for 2, which is... initial velocity for 2 pula. Sorry. You have to do M1, U1 settle. M2, mass untuk yang kedua 0.9 kg. Why? It's 900 gram. Just change it to kilogram. Next, initial velocity for 2, which is kosong meter per second. Kenapa? It is at rest. Next, let's move on. Mass 1, 0.250 kg. V1, final velocity. Basically yang ini untuk before collision. Yang ini untuk after collision. Sebab kenapa? I'll explain in a while. Okay. Mass for the first one, which is 0.25 kilogram. What is the velocity for the first one? 4 kan? Tapi, remember kena buat x component, y component. Macam mana? Tulis siap-siap. 4 cos 50. Why? We want to find towards the x component. 4 sin 50. Why? We want to find towards the y component. Remember, negative. Tulis sini, negative. Okay. Next, M2, 0.90 kilogram. V2, nak buat apa? Cari. Okay. Now, this is the tricky part. Two tricky parts. Number one, what formula to use? And number two, which component to use? Okay. Dekat sini, what formula to use? You ada M1, U1, M2, U2, so on. Do you guys realize boleh guna momentum punya formula? Boleh guna momentum punya formula. Tapi momentum is P equals to MV. What relates initial and final? Elastic collision punya formula. You guys know very well this is talking about collision. Collision is elastic, non-elastic. Dalam kes ni, elastic. Elastic kan ada dua properties. Satu, momentum is conserved. The moment momentum is conserved, initial momentum equals to final momentum. Elastic collision juga mengatakan kinetic energy is conserved. Maksudnya initial kinetic energy is equals to final kinetic energy. So over here, momentum is mv kan? Boleh tak guna summation atau total of initial momentum equals to total of final momentum? We have learned this, right? Gunalah formula ni. So what will you be doing? You will actually be doing M1 U1 plus M2 U2 equals to M1 V1 equals to plus M2 V2. So what you need to do? So basically, in this question, you need to substitute everything again. Number one, 0.25. Substitute whatever you have listed. That's why it's best for you to list down. So your mass for 2 is 0.9, darab dengan kosong. Tulis juga walaupun jawapan dia akan jadi kosong. Equals to 0.25. Now, this is the tricky part. Nak pilih yang ini ke yang ini? Okay. Sekarang we are talking about the X component. Macam mana I tahu? Sebab the ball over here is moving to the right. Okay. Ada tak kita cakap apa-apa pasal the ball moving up and down? No. That is number one. Number two, you guys know very well, when there is X component flat horizontal, Y component tiada. That is number two. Number three, when X component is 90 degrees towards Y component, maksudnya Y component is non-existent. That's why we choose X component. So dekat sini ambil X component punya. The moment you take 4 cos 50 degrees plus 0.9 times by V2, what you need to do, you have to label here for X component. Baru ini betul. Kenapa? You have to define atau indicate atau tunjuk yang ini value ni you ambil daripada X component punya. Sebab initial you are taking from the X component. Ada tak pergerakan atas bawah untuk initial? Tiada kan? So you are taking for pergerakan kiri dan kanan je. Confirm for X component. That's why initial dengan final, kalau initial ambil X component, final juga ambil X component. So you will get your answer V2X. Basically V2 lah, tapi untuk X component punya. Alright. Dia suruh cari apa? Calculate the magnitude. You guys know very well. Dah cari V2X. X component dah cari. Kena cari apa? Y component, right? Let me just add another page over here. Let's do it together. You need to do for Y component. Okay. The tricky part over here is, kan first part, bola tu, tennis ball and soccer ball is at X component. Y component is non-existent kan? Kenapa? Pergerakan tiada atas dan bawah. Tapi we still know it's an elastic collision. You can still use the formula. Initial momentum equals to final momentum. Jadi, when we are talking about for Y component, ada tak velocity atas bawah? Tiada kan? Only kiri kanan. So, walaupun you nak guna M1U1 plus M2U2, let's say sini 0.25 darab dengan U1. Apa value U1? Kosong. Kenapa? Tiada pergerakan untuk Y component. You have indicated it is for Y component. Plus M2 0.9 darab dengan kosong juga. Tiada pergerakan atas bawah, hanya kanan saja atau kiri saja. In this case, it is at rest. Okay. So, that's why I can clearly say for Y component, the initial momentum is 0. Then for final momentum, untuk Y component, what do you need to do? Label balik M2V2 plus, M1V1 plus M2V2. Okay, over here, M2 kamu, how do you solve your M2? Number 1, M1 is 0.25, sudah ada dekat sini. V1, tadi dah ambil untuk X, sekarang ambil untuk Y. M2, ambil V2, unknown. So, you will get your answer, right? But remember, that will be your V2 untuk Y component. Kenapa? We have listed here for Y component. So, what you need to do next? Okay, Y component punya V2 sudah ada. X component untuk V2 pun sudah ada. Boleh tak cari apa itu V2? Boleh kan? Macam mana? Pythagoras theorem. Why? We have learned that to find magnitude, you have to use Pythagoras theorem. V2x square, basically V2 daripada X component tambah V2 daripada Y component square root. You get your answer. Itu magnitude. Nak cari direction macam mana? Nak cari direction, you guys know very well. Tangent theta equals to V2y over V2x. Okay, dulu kita belajar apa? Tangent theta equals to Y component over X component. Sekarang, masukkan value V2y dekat sini. Basically, V2 untuk Y component and V2 untuk X component di bawah. Theta equals to tangent inverse, you will get your answer. So, please write down in full form and please show your working step by step, because the final answer would be magnitude equals to 4.91 meter per second and direction equals to 9.97 degrees. Okay, this will be your final answer. Please write down your answers properly. Okay, direction dekat sini positif kan? The moment direction dekat sini positif, so kalau draw dekat sini macam ni kan? So positif apa? 9.97. So you have to indicate a magnitude of 4.91 meter per second with a direction of 9.97 degrees above the x-axis. That is the full sentence answer. Okay, please write down in full sentence. Okay, that is for the first question. I hope you guys get the concept right. Number 1, make sure you guys know for which component we are talking. Number 2, identify sebelum collision dan after collision. Ada tak X component? Mana satu ada, mana satu tiada. The moment is 90 degrees, tiada. Number 2, the moment is moving horizontally, tiada vertical component atau tiada Y component. The moment is moving vertically, tiada horizontal component atau X component. Okay, now let me just draw a small description over here. Let's say pergerakan bola macam ni, dia hit, ini before. Okay, ini before collision. After collision, it moves at 30 degrees towards x-axis. Before collision, ada tak X component? Tiada kan, sebab it's moving vertically. So, you have to write for X component, yes, guna sama formula. Tapi, initial momentum equals to final momentum. X component, ada tak untuk before? Tiada, automatically 0. Okay? But, for Y component, ada tak value? Ada. So, you have to write the value M1U1 plus M2U2 and so on. Alright, same thing kalau macam tadi. Horizontal. It hits and then it moves at a certain angle. Okay. Ada tak Y component? Tiada. Tapi ada X component. So, untuk calculation for Y component, your initial will be 0. And then equals to the formula M2V2 plus M1V1. Okay. Now, remember, selalunya tak semestinya before collision je ada salah satu komponen. Sometimes, after collision pun akan ada salah satu komponen je. Let's say, it hits at a certain angle, theta 30 degrees. Lepas tu, it is before collision. After collision, dia move horizontally. Therefore, for after collision, horizontal component saja ada. Maksudnya, Y component ada tak? Tiada kan? That is the logic behind it. Okay? I hope you guys understand this very well. Okay guys? Very important. Okay. Now let's move on to this question. Okay. Soalan ni clearly tiada gambar. So what you need to do? You have to draw. That is the best direction to answer questions. Alright. Just hold on a moment. Alright. 2 titanium spheres. Spheres, just make sure you guys know what's the shape of sphere. Sphere is like a ball. Kalau tak tahu sphere, just assume it's a ball. Okay, that's the best. 2 titanium spheres approach each other head on. Head on macam mana berlanggar lah, hit each other. With the same speed. Maksudnya initial velocity untuk kedua-duanya adalah 3. Collide elastically. Collide elastically means apa? Elastic collision. Elastic collision terus list down. 2 property. Number 1, initial momentum is equals to final momentum. Number 2, initial kinetic energy equals to final kinetic energy. Why? Because in elastic collision, it has stated 2 properties. Number 1, the momentum before and after is conserved. Number 2, the kinetic energy before and after is conserved. Therefore, these are the formulas that you need to use. P equals apa? mv. K equals apa? Half mv squared. Okay? Now, let's have a look at the question. Before collision, it hits each other. After collision, one of the spheres whose mass is 500 gram remains at rest. Calculate the mass of other sphere. Dekat sini, tiada angle apa-apa. So you guys can just relax. No worries at all. Tapi, we have lack of information. That's the one will kick in the doubts. Alright. First thing, draw dulu. Head on, maksudnya satu belah kiri, satu belah kanan. 223 meter per second. Apa beza dekat sini? Remember, dia bagi speed 3 meter per second. Tapi formula velocity kan? Jadi, as velocity is a vector quantity, the moment it moves to the right, it's positive. The moment it moves to the left, it's negative. You guys boleh assume mana-mana. Nak assume yang ini M1 pun boleh. Nak assume yang ini M1 pun boleh. But to be safe, M1 just take whatever's on the left, M2 take whatever on the right. Okay, that's the easiest way. Make your life easy with the questions and data given. Okay, dia cakap collide elastically, which means lepas collision, it moves away, right? But dia juga bagi extra information, which is one of the sphere atau bola yang langgar, which is 500 gram in mass, remains at rest. Maksud dia, you guys can assume, okay, over here, I would like to assume the mass of first one, 500 gram. Mass of first one 0.5 kg. Kenapa tukar kepada SI unit? Alright. So, mass untuk yang kedua, you do not know. Next, let's continue listing out the data. M1 is positive 0.5 kilogram. U1 is positive 3 meter per second. M2 is you do not know. U2 is negative 3 meter per second. Why? Same speed but different direction. Next, M1 equals to 0.5 kilogram. V1. Okay, what is V1? V1, we assume since kita cakap mass untuk M1 is 500 gram, that's why it remains at rest. So when we talk about M1, 1 refers to the same object. Let's say kita cakap M1. M1 refers to tennis ball. U1 refers to that tennis ball. V1 also refers to that tennis ball. The 1 represents the same object basically. So M1, 0.5 kilogram. Basically, V1 at rest. So V1 punya value apa? Kalau at rest, we have learned it's 0 meter per second. M2, 0.5 kilogram. V2, kena cari. Alright, dekat sini, you guys jangan panic. Sebab I understand. Sometimes you guys will get panic because ada dua unknown. The moment dua unknown, oh my god, which one to use? This one or this one? Actually, you know what's the fact? You can use both of them. Kenapa? Dalam matematik kita dah belajar, kalau ada more than one unknown, what you can do? Simultaneous equation. Nak buat simultaneous equation macam mana? Kena dapatkan dua equation. Nak dapatkan dua equation macam mana dalam physics? Use two different formulas. Okay. Elastic collision, macam mana you tahu? Sini ada tulis elastically. Okay. So elastic collision have two properties. Momentum is conserved and kinetic energy is conserved. So what you can do? Buat je lah formula dia. Initial momentum equals to final momentum. Substitute inside. M1 U1 plus M2 U2 equals to M1 V1 plus M2 V2. So, you'll be getting 0.5 darab 3 plus M2 darab negatif 3. Remember negative, jangan lupa. Equals to M1, which is your... What will be your M1? Your M1 would be 0.5 juga. V1 kosong. Kenapa? At rest, right? Ini before collision, ini after collision. Walaupun dia darab kosong, tulis je darab kosong. Plus M2. You tidak tahu, V2 pun tidak tahu. Jadi, what will you be getting? You will be getting over here M2 V2 plus 3 M2 equals to 1.5. Okay, what is my suggestion? Nak buat simultaneous equation, it's best for physics, you use substitution method. Jadi, nak buat substitution method, make something your subject. Okay, just in case you guys forget, walaupun ini M, tak boleh gabung tau. Sebab ini M1, ini M2. Ini cakap pasal objek lain, ini cakap pasal objek lain. So what you can do? Make V2 the subject. 1.5 minus 3 M2 over M2. This will be your first equation. Alright, first equation settled. How do you do your second equation? To do your second equation, you know the collision is elastic. You know also kinetic energy is conserved. So what can you do? Initial kinetic energy equals to final kinetic energy. Apa formula kinetic energy? 1 over 2, just because kinetic energy punya formula is 1 over 2 mv square, doesn't mean everything need to be v. V represents velocity. You can change it to u in order to represent it as initial velocity also. So what you can do? Mu square, remember M1 U1, M2 U2 square equals to 1 over 2 M1 V1 square plus 1 over 2 M2 V2 square. Now, substitute je value dia macam tadi. 0.5 3 square tambah 1 over 2 M2 3 square. Remember, negative 3 equals to 1 over 2 0.5 kosong square plus 1 over 2 M2 tidak tahu, V2 tidak tahu square. Next, M2 V2 square minus 9 M2 equals to 4.5. This will be your second equation. Just simplify everything on the top, you get your second equation. How do we solve it? I think you guys know sudah ada V2. Boleh tak substitute V2 ni dalam sini? Boleh kan? Because we are talking about the same V. Kalau yang tadi tu is V1, you tak boleh substitute. Kalau dia V2 and V2, baru boleh substitute. Okay? Because we are talking about the same thing. Now, let's do this substitution method. Have to write down sub 1 into 2. M2, 1.5 minus 3M2 over M2 over, bracket square minus 9M2 equals to 4.5. Remember, tak boleh pakai potong macam ni tau. Ini square, kembangkan dulu, baru potong. What will be your final answer? M2 equals to 0.167 kilogram. Okay. Some tips for you to answer questions regarding this chapter. Number 1, what can you do? Number 1, you need tukar kepada SI. Number 2, identify which formula according to collision. What type of collision? Elastic or inelastic? Okay, elastic collision ada kinetic energy initial equals to kinetic energy final, and momentum initial equals to momentum final. Inelastic, kinetic energy initial is not equals to kinetic energy final. Maksudnya yang ini jangan guna untuk equation. Asal dia suruh bagi, dia tak cukup data, dia suruh you cari, jangan guna yang ini. Sebab dia not equal. Inelastic collision, initial equals to final, momentum. Okay, number 1 collision. Number 2, check ada impulse tak. Kenapa? Impulse walaupun dia J equals to Ft, J equals to mv minus mu kan? Final momentum minus initial momentum. Ada juga mv dekat sini, ada juga mu dekat sini. Okay? Please remember which one we're going to use. Number 2 is formula. Number 3, data. Dua jenis. Number 1, dia bagi diagram, you have to list down. Tolong list down the data. What is M1, U1, M2, U2, M1, V1, M2, V2. That's the basic thing that you need to know. Number 2, sentence. Kalau dia bagi dalam bentuk sentence, draw dulu the diagram. Lepas tu list down the data. Alright, these are some tips that you guys need to know for answering questions in this chapter. Okay guys, I hope these questions, methods and techniques have been helpful for you guys to answer questions from chapter 3. Okay, so what will be your homework? I would like you guys to copy down the question again for number 1 and also for number 2 and try it out yourself and please pass it up to me. Okay, write down the full working, include your formulas and full working solution. I hope this session has been good for you guys, helpful for you guys. Thank you very much. Happy study, guys.